Alright, we're going to do a tomato review today on this tomato right here, and this is called the Sweet Pea Tomato. And a lot of people have been requesting for me to review this tomato and to offer the seeds if I can. And so I figured I'd give this a try after many requests. And so here it is. We're up to this point, and so we're going to do a review on the Sweet Pea Tomato. So I've been growing this tomato now for the whole season, and what I can say is this tomato is an absolutely unbelievably aggressive tomato variety as far as the growth. This thing is actually outgrowing and outpacing my Everglade tomato, which my Everglade tomato is a very aggressive tomato variety, but the tomatoes are much bigger, and the bracts and between the nodes are a lot more spread out. This tomato variety will put out hundreds of these branches, literally. And I'll try to pick one up. They lock together too, this thing. It's very hard to separate these. Once they go together, they don't want to separate. I'll give you an idea. So they come in a bract like this, and these can get quite long. This is a short one. I've had these things hang down with probably maybe about 15 tomatoes on there, 16 tomatoes. They get quite long, and they're prolific. They're everywhere. These bracts, I mean, are like on every node, and they hang down, and there's like, oh my God, it's like it's an unbelievable amount of tomatoes. And also too, the size of the plant is just unbelievable. I mean, this plant, if I'd known it was anything like this, I wouldn't have planted it anywhere near my garden this year, because of the absolute enormity of the size of this plant and the way it's taking over. It's absolutely incredible, and it's really hard to get in there where all the tomatoes are on the inside of this big giant bush. It's hard to get to the center of it because there's so many branches and stuff. I'm really impressed with the growth of it, and just don't. What I would warn you is don't grow this type of tomato anywhere near your garden. This is something you grow off to the side of your yard. Don't grow this in your garden. This thing's going to drop tomatoes all over the place. I'm going to have a nightmare trying to pick these things up because they're all small, and they're already starting to fall now. And it's just a very, very aggressive variety. It's more aggressive than the Everglade. I thought the Everglade tomato was aggressive. This is even more aggressive. This is incredibly aggressive. So just keep that in mind as you're growing. I mean, it's a fun tomato to grow, but just don't grow it in your garden because it's going to cause you a lot of aggravation. And believe me when I tell you, the aggravation I'm getting from the Everglade tomato is very aggravating, because a lot of times I'm mixing soil. I mix soil, and for some reason, when I plant my tomatoes, sometimes I get a tomato that comes up. The other ones happen to dampen off. The other tomato lives, so I figure, I got at least one tomato plant that lives, and it turns out to be an Everglade tomato. These Everglade tomatoes, they're very annoying. They get into everything. They're good, but they get into my seed start mixes sometimes. I literally have to buy new mixes of soil completely void of where these tomatoes have possibly been, and that's the only way I don't get random tomato seeds in my soil. It's a nuisance. And so this ain't going to be much better. Believe me when I tell you, it gets very aggravating when you're growing all these varieties, and then after it's grown and it's starting to get to 3-4 feet tall, you find out it's an Everglade tomato. That is very annoying, because you would have started the tomato over again had you known that one that survived was an Everglade tomato. Somehow they get into my soil, and these things are annoying. They're fun, but they're annoying, and they get into your soil mixes, and they're just a nuisance after a while. So I'm warning you about that because I'm warning you about this. Okay, so this is it. Let's take a closer look at the tomato. You can see these are very, very tiny tomatoes. These are actually much smaller than the spoon tomato. A lot of people say the spoon tomato is the world's smallest tomato. No way. This thing is definitely smaller, consistently smaller. Now, the spoon tomato can make very, very tiny tomatoes, but it's not consistently small. It's small. Sometimes they get a little larger. They spread around. The sizes really change. This is consistently small, and they can be. I have tomatoes on here that can be as small as this, for example. This is about the size of a pea right here. Okay, the sizes vary quite a bit. They can be the size of a pea all the way up to this size, or even bigger. It can be almost the size of a regular currant tomato. So this is the variation in size you can get from this. As you can see, they're nice and red in color, or an orange or a deep orange in color. They're not Everglade pink, and that you can see the sizes range quite a bit. Okay, just want to make sure we're clear on that the sizes can vary, and the sizes vary mainly because of the bract. So the bract might put out a string of tomatoes, for example, like this, and then on the very end of it, you'll have like all those little ones, and then the bract decides to ripen everything, even when they're small. This one happens, where are you? This one happened to ripen it a little small in the middle of it, but normally it's the end of the bract where the smaller tomatoes are going to occur. So that's what we're dealing with here. Now, as far as weighing it, I'm not going to actually weigh that. I mean, there's no point in weighing it. I'd have to weigh like 20 or 30 of them just to get it to an ounce or a half of an ounce even. So there's no point in weighing it. So let's go right over to the bricks and see what the brick says. In fact, with the bricks, we're gonna do a pop. Pimp popple. We're going to pop a pimple like this. Is how you do it. You just give it a little thing like that, and we're just going to squirt a little juice on there. Not much. Seeds are seeds. See, you can see the seeds coming out already. Oh, this is going to be a problem in my garden. I got to get those tomatoes out of there. Okay, the bricks is very high on this. Very, very high. It's an 8.5 on the bricks. That's telling me this thing is going to be sugar sweet, guys. This thing is going to be incredibly sweet. Probably more than I can handle. But we will give it a go. So let's eat one. Let's see what it tastes like. We'll try this one. Guys, that's incredibly sweet. Holy smokes. I mean, it literally tastes like I put sugar on. Like, picture cutting a tomato in half, and then sprinkle the top of that slice where you opened it up, the open part of it. Sprinkle some, instead of putting salt on it, just put sugar on it. That's what this tastes like. Okay, start with the sweetness. The sweetness was incredibly intense. It was a very, very high, strong sweetness flavor that really was very dominant flavor. The sweetness was very strong. I'm going to put that at about a 38 on the sweetness. It was quite high, and it was very, very strong, but it's short-lived. So the sweetness comes in, and then the sweetness leaves. It doesn't really stick around. It kind of just hits the surface of your tongue and then goes. So it's not like a sugar cane type of sweetness. It's more like a fructose type of a sweetness. Like, for example, if you eat an apple or you eat some kind of a fruit like that, those basic terpenes in that fruit, that the basic fructose is what's in there. It's not sugar. It's fructose, but it's a type of sugar. It's fructose. The type of sugar that fructose is very different than sugarcane type sugar. The fructose, the natural fructose in fruit, has a very short-lived sweetness. It comes in, you get your little sweetness, and it leaves. That's what that kind of a flavor is, and that type of sugar on this tomato is. It comes in, you can really taste the sweetness on the front part of your tongue and the upper part of your mouth, right behind your front teeth, right up in there. You can really get that sense of sweetness, and then it kind of tapers back, and then that's where the tanginess part kicks in. So we're going 38 on the sweetness with the tangy. I'm probably going to put that around 32 on the tangy, so it was pretty good. So the sweetness was incredibly higher than the tanginess, but you got to remember, in contrast, the tanginess comes in after the sweetness already starts to dissipate, because it's a fructose type of a sweetness. It comes in, does its thing, and it kind of backs off. It doesn't make your mouth all sticky and sugary like. So it does its thing, it's strong, and then it goes away. The tanginess part of it, now the tanginess, I'd say that, like I said, I'm going to say that was about a 32, or I'd go around a 32 for the tanginess. That was a pretty good number for that. And it did its thing, and the tanginess was quite good. It's just the sweetness was a little high. And the tomato flavor, I don't know, it had a nice tomato flavor. Now, again, when I'm talking about tomato flavor, we're not talking about how good the flavor was. We're talking about the prominence of the flavor. How strong and intense was the tomato flavor in that tomato experience. We're not talking about how much I like it. We're talking about how strong it was in that tomato experience. For this little tiny tomato, that tomato had a pretty good amount of tomato flavor. So I'm probably going to end up saying on this, from a scale of 0 to 10, I'm probably going to put this at about a 7. It was pretty prominent. It was there. It's still on the back of my tongue as I'm doing the video. So it left its trace, and I can still taste it. So it's a pretty strong flavor, and it tastes like tomato. It didn't taste anything awkward about it, but it was a pretty dominant part of this tomato profile. Sweetness first, and the tangy comes back with the sweetness and the moisture, and then the tomato flavor lingers in the back of your tongue, and it does its thing. It's incredible for a tiny little tomato like this. It really is. I'm very impressed with it so far. Okay, so the moisture part of it, it's just basically pretty moist. We're going to put that about a 6, so it's a perfect moisture level. So it had the ability to deliver the whole flavor package to the back of your tongue, and you need the moisture to be able to do that, and this had the right amount of moisture to do it. So I'm going to put that at about 6, perfect level for that. There was no tardiness of any kind. There was no undertones of any kind, so 0, 0. Texture was very short-lived. It was very small tomato. The texture was pretty good. The skins were a little bit on the tough side. So as soon as you pop that thing in your mouth and you pop it and the seeds all come out of it, now you're left with the skin bag. And that skin bag is, you got to chew it or spit it out. It's one of those things. So because the skins were tough on it, there's really not much you can do. I mean, you could just slurp down what's in the inside of it and then spit the skin out. I don't know any other way to put it. But texture-wise, the texture of the tomato itself was pretty nice. It's mostly watery and seed gel, very little skin, but there was some skin in there. And that's where the sweetness mostly lied, within the skin part of it. The sweetness didn't lie within the gel part. It was actually on the flesh part of that tomato. So the more flesh that's on that tomato, the sweeter it's going to be. So I'm going to just put that middle of the road, guys. It's really too small of a tomato for me to really, say, I should have been harder, more flesh or less flesh. What really makes the number kind of stay average is because of the skins, which I should actually rate separately, but I just don't have any room to rate the skin tightness. But the skin was a little on the tough side, so the inside just breaks up and dissolves, and now you're left with a skin. But that's no big deal because you can spit the skin right out. It's easy enough. Production, off the chart. We're going to go with a 9.75 on production. That's the highest producing variety of tomato I'm probably going to be able to review this year. I don't know of any other variety that's capable of producing as many tomatoes as that's coming off of this thing right now. It is ungodly how many tomatoes are on this little plant. It's unbelievable. It's blowing away my Everglade tomatoes by the bush. So for every 10 Everglade tomatoes I got growing, one plant is able to produce more tomatoes than 10 of my Everglade tomato plants. And my Everglade tomato plants are very, very productive. This plant is blowing it out of water. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's already growing to the backside of my garden, and it's absolutely loaded with flowers. It doesn't even have all the tomatoes on it yet, which I'm getting a little nervous now, because when that thing fills up with tomatoes, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Because trying to get seeds out of these are not going to be easy. I'm going to have to just fill a 5-gallon bucket up and just start scrunching them up to get. I'm not going to sit there and pop every one of them. I ain't doing that. That's weight. I'll be here for days trying to do that with this tomato. And these tomatoes are filled. That little tiny tomato has as many seeds as the Everglade tomato, which is a larger currant tomato. That thing has just about as many seeds as my Everglade tomatoes, and there's 10, 20 times more tomatoes per plant than it's just, I've never seen anything like this. This thing is a marvel by itself. I'm glad I reviewed it. I'm glad a lot of people suggested it to me, because I'm thinking in my head, it's just another spoon tomato, or not. People just put names on. It's just nothing. This thing blows away spoon tomato. It blows away my Everglade tomato. This thing is an absolute monster. This is not something you want to grow anywhere near your garden. So when I talk about production on this thing, we're going with a 9.75. I'd probably go with a 10, roughly, but I'm not sure if I have a variety out there that would outpace this. I would almost question that with my my wild hairy tomato, because my wild hairy tomato, I've never seen anything produce tomatoes like that either. That's another variety, and those tomatoes are larger. And that one plant got about 25 feet long, and it put out literally hundreds upon hundreds of tomatoes, so many of them that I wasn't even collecting them at any point. There was no point in me collecting them anymore, and they ended up all over my yard. So I've never actually seen a tomato variety produce as many tomatoes as my wild hairy tomato. But this is right behind it. This is definitely this is right behind it. If not, might be actually more. Depends on if I could fill up a 5-gallon pail full of these tomatoes like that. Forget it. This is going to be a number one. This is the highest production tomato I've ever grown in my life. I can't believe how many tomatoes this thing can put out. So, how do I rate this tomato from a scale of, 1 to 10, with 1 being number 1? I'm going to give this tomato variety a 3, and mainly because it's a good tomato, it's a currant tomato, but you're really limited on uses on it. And it does have a very invasive nature to it, which is great. It does produce a lot of tomatoes, but you really can't do too much with a tomato variety like this other than eating them fresh. And I guess you can make sauce if if you're in a desperate situation, you wanted to make some kind of sauce with it and just keep popping those tomatoes. I guess you could, but I can't really go too much higher than that because there's really not a lot of versatility with this variety as far as what you can do with it. It's just it's a tiny little tomato. There's not a lot of things you can do with it. I mean, you can make sauce and you could maybe eat them fresh, and that's really about it. Maybe you can put it in salsa. I don't know. Because of that reason, I can't really go that high with the rating. However, I am going to give it a 3 because of the massive number on the production is beyond anything I ever could have imagined a tomato to actually get like. So, I mean, because of that reason, I'm going to keep it at 9.75 on the production. But as far as the scale goes from, what do I consider the tomato overall as of all of these settings, I can't go higher than 3. I mean, everything else tasted good, but because the usability is low, I mean, you can't do much with it, guys, other than grow for nostalgia, eat them like little berries. That's really about all you can do with it. So that's the reason why it's a 3. Had those tomatoes been at least cherry-sized tomatoes, no, I probably would have put that up at a 1.5 or something, but they're not. They're little tiny tomatoes. They have an invasive nature to it. They can take over areas really heavily, and so you got to be very careful where you plant this variety of tomatoes. So there's some cautions with it. But other than that, I think it's a great tomato. If you've never grown this tomato, the sweet pea tomato, you definitely got to give that a go if you're a tomato grower. And remember, don't plant it anywhere near your garden. Plant that thing off to the side somewhere. It's probably like, what do you call those, sidewalk crack tomatoes? Sidewalk crack tomatoes. They grow out of the cracks of sidewalks. This is one of those type of tomatoes. They grow out of the cracks of sidewalks, and they're happy that way. Don't plant it by your garden. You're going to be sorry. You're going to be cleaning up that mess. And once you get that stuff in your soil, you can't get out. They come up every year like weeds. I mean, by the hundreds, too. So, and the bad thing about that is that if you got a blight problem, all those volunteers that come up, they're all going to introduce the blight very early in the season. Trust me on that. You don't want volunteers coming up in your garden with these tomatoes. You don't care about off to the side. It's just in your garden. You don't want all those volunteers coming up where you plant your precious tomatoes. Your brandywines and your beefsteak tomatoes. Because this thing's got a million of these little things coming up. And after a while, you give up. Pulling them up, you give up. And eventually they start taking over the whole garden. So just keep that in mind. They're a pain in the neck. Don't plant it in the garden. Other than that, it's a fun tomato to grow. Grow it off to the side and have fun with it. I mean, there's definitely... you can have a lot of fun with a tomato variety like this. You can really impress people. All right, so anyway, that's my tomato review for the sweet pea tomato. And I'll leave all the information I can gather about it in the description below. I will also leave information on my website, hrseeds. And if you want the latest updated information, you need to visit the website because I don't always update the videos. So make sure you visit the website. And if I get time, I update the videos. But visit the website if you're looking for any information or updated information on this variety tomato. I will also leave a link in the description below where you can visit hrseeds.com and purchase the seeds for this tomato. All right, so that's basically it. That's my tomato review for the sweet pea tomato. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you on the next one. Take care.